This is the story of an outcast girl who saved a boy teetering on the edge of a cliff. What she didn't know was that this was no ordinary boy. He was the son of a powerful Comanche war chief named Running Wolf, and her single act of courage was about to ignite a forbidden love, a furious town, and a secret that could get them all killed. But what happened next? What she discovered in the dead of night left everyone in absolute shock. The Texas sun was a hammer, pounding the dusty settlement of Cedar Ridge into submission. Long skeletal shadows stretched from the weathered buildings, and the air was so thick you could chew on it. 19-year-old Sarah Mae Whitmore felt the sweat trickle down her neck, her blonde curls sticking to her skin as she hauled another bucket from the town well. She was beautiful, with eyes the color of a summer sky and skin like porcelain. But in Cedar Ridge, beauty like hers wasn't a gift. It was a curse. "There goes the preacher's cursed daughter," Mrs. Henderson whispered, her voice a venomous hiss that carried on the still air. "Mark my words, that girl will bring nothing but ruin to this town." Sarah's jaw clenched so hard it ached, but she didn't look up. She kept walking. She was used to the whispers, the sideways glances, the way conversations would die the second she walked into the general store. Ever since her mother died giving birth to her, the town had treated her like a bad omen, a plague carrier walking in their midst. Her father, Reverend Jeremiah Whitmore, did his best. He was a good man, a kind man, but even his sermons on love and forgiveness couldn't shield her from the town's cruel superstition. They saw her mother's death in her eyes, and they never let her forget it. The wooden bucket groaned as she lowered it into the dark, cool depths of the well. The drought had been strangling their lands for weeks, and every drop of water was a precious jewel. As she pulled it back up, her arms straining, a voice cut through the afternoon heat. "Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah!" It was young Tommy Fletcher, all of 10 years old, his face flushed and his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and pure terror. He was running so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. "You got to help," he gasped, his voice cracking. "There's a boy. He's stuck on Devil's Ledge." Sarah dropped the bucket. Water splashed across the baked earth, vanishing in an instant. Devil's Ledge. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine. It was a treacherous cliff 2 miles east of town, a place of loose rock and deadly drops. A place children were forbidden to go. "What boy, Tommy?" she asked, her mind already racing. "Is he from town?" "No, ma'am," the boy panted, shaking his head. "I ain't never seen him before. He's got dark skin and strange clothes. I think—" Tommy lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I think he might be one of them Indians." Sarah's blood ran cold. Relations between Cedar Ridge and the local Comanche tribe were stretched tighter than a bowstring. A single spark, one wrong move could set the whole frontier ablaze. An incident involving a native child. It was unthinkable. It could mean war. She was already moving, sprinting toward the stable where her horse Belle was kept. "Did you tell anyone else, Tommy?" she asked, her voice sharp with urgency. "No, ma'am. I came straight to you." He looked up at her, his expression earnest. "My pa always said you got more sense than most folks in this town, even if they don't appreciate it none." The boy's trust was a heavy weight, but it was also a fire in her belly. Within minutes, she was on Belle, racing across the plains, her hair streaming behind her like a golden banner against the amber sky. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. She wasn't just riding toward a boy on a cliff. She was riding toward a destiny she couldn't possibly imagine. Devil's Ledge rose from the desert floor like a jagged red rock tooth. They called it that because when the wind blew just right, it howled through the crevices like the screams of the damned. But as Sarah drew closer, she heard a different sound. It was the real sound of terror, the desperate cries of a child. She leaped from Belle's back, tying the reins to a gnarled oak tree, and scrambled to the edge of the cliff. She peered over, her breath catching in her throat. There he was, a small boy, no more than 8 years old, clinging to a narrow sliver of rock 20 feet below. His small hands were white-knuckled, gripping the crumbling sandstone, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. Tommy was right. He was Native American. His dark hair was braided with delicate feathers and beads, and he wore a buckskin shirt and leggings decorated with intricate patterns. Even in his sheer terror, he held himself with a strange, noble dignity. "Hold on!" Sarah yelled down in English, her voice echoing in the canyon. She then tried the few words of Comanche she'd learned from passing traders. "I'm coming to help you!" The boy looked up. His dark eyes were huge, filled with a mix of fear and stunned surprise to see a white woman there. He shouted something back in a rapid torrent of words she couldn't understand, but the desperation in his tone was universal. Sarah's mind worked furiously. The cliff face was too steep, the rock too unstable for a direct descent. But 50 yards to the east, the slope was more gradual. It was still dangerous, but it was a chance. She always carried a rope on Belle's saddle. It was a habit born from living on the frontier, where trouble was always just around the corner. "I'll be right back," she called down, hoping her tone sounded more confident than she felt. She raced back to her horse, her hands already working the knots of the rope. She fashioned a makeshift harness around her waist, the rough fibers digging into her skin. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange. Darkness would make this rescue impossible. Every second counted. The descent was a nightmare. Loose rocks scattered and fell beneath her feet, their clatter echoing into the abyss below. Her hands were scraped raw, her simple dress catching and tearing on the sharp edges of the rock. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. When she finally reached the ledge, she saw the true extent of the danger. The stone beneath the boy's feet was fractured, a spiderweb of cracks spreading from where he stood. It was ready to give way at any moment. One wrong move, one sudden shift in weight, and they would both be sent plunging to their deaths. "Easy," she whispered, inching toward him. "I'm here to help." The boy's eyes met hers, and in their dark depths she saw something that stole her breath away. It wasn't just fear. It was a fierce, blazing intelligence, a strength that seemed impossible for a child. This was no ordinary boy. Even here, terrified and on the brink of death, he carried himself like a prince. She carefully moved beside him, testing every foothold, every handhold. The ledge groaned under their combined weight, and for a terrifying second, she felt it shift. But it held. Working quickly, she looped the rope around his small waist, then secured it to her own, creating a fragile lifeline. "We're going to climb up," she said, using slow, deliberate hand gestures. "Together. Follow me, and don't look down." Those 20 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. Every move was a gamble. Every breath was a prayer. The boy was incredible. He was brave and agile, following her lead without a single whimper. Twice the rock beneath their feet crumbled away, sending a shower of stones into the darkness. But each time they held on, their fingers digging into the cliff face, refusing to let go. When they finally hauled themselves over the top, they collapsed onto solid ground, gasping for air, their lungs burning. The sun had vanished, and a blanket of stars was emerging in the twilight sky. In the fading light, Sarah finally got a good look at him. He was beautiful, with high cheekbones and those intelligent dark eyes. The beadwork on his clothes was exquisite, the craftsmanship of a master. The feathers in his hair weren't just decorations. They were symbols, telling a story of lineage and status. And that's when she heard it. The thunder of approaching horses, a lot of them, riding hard and fast. Sarah's heart plummeted. It wasn't the townsfolk from Cedar Ridge. The silhouettes against the horizon were unmistakable. These were Comanche warriors. And even in the dim light, she could see the glint of war paint on their faces. The boy beside her scrambled to his feet. He let out a piercing cry in his own language, a call that was both a signal and a plea. The lead rider, a man who seemed to tower over the others, even on horseback, shouted a reply. His voice was a deep baritone that carried a mix of raw relief and something else, something that sounded like pure joy. As they galloped closer, Sarah realized she was looking at the most magnificent man she had ever seen. He was impossibly tall, with shoulders as broad as an oak tree, and muscles that rippled under his bronze skin. His long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers and silver ornaments that caught the starlight. His face was streaked with red and black war paint, but it couldn't hide the sharp, handsome lines of his features. features that looked like they'd been carved from the stone of the mountains themselves. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were as dark as a moonless night, fierce as a thunderstorm, and they held an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through her, to see every secret she had ever kept. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a man who commanded armies, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. This was a king. The boy ran toward them, his voice a torrent of excited Comanche. The great warrior's gaze shifted from the boy to Sarah. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. He dismounted with a fluid grace, the movement of a panther, and approached her slowly. His hands were open, unthreatening, but his presence was so powerful, so overwhelming, that Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. He stopped just a few feet away from her. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder, his English accented but perfectly clear. "You saved my son." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Son, this magnificent, terrifying man, was his father. She hadn't just saved a native child. She had saved the son of a high-ranking Comanche leader, a chief. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This one act of compassion hadn't just been a rescue, it had been an event that could change everything, for better or for worse. I couldn't just leave him there," she stammered, suddenly aware of her torn dress, her bloody hands, and the way this man's gaze seemed to strip her bare. The warrior studied her for a long, silent moment. His eyes took in every detail, the dirt on her face, the exhaustion in her posture, the defiance in her chin. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. There was a new note in it, a note of respect. "I am Running Wolf," he said, and the name seemed to carry the weight of legend. "War Chief of the Southern Comanche. This is my son, Little Eagle." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "What is your name, brave woman?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Whitmore." The name registered. She saw his eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. He knew the name Whitmore, the preacher's daughter, the white holy man's child. She could see the calculations happening behind those dark eyes. The new layer of complication this added to an already impossible situation. The silence between them stretched, taut and vibrating with unspoken questions. The other warriors sat on their horses like stone statues, their faces impassive, their hands resting near their weapons. Little Eagle stood between his father and Sarah, chattering excitedly, pointing to the cliff, then to her, retelling the story of his rescue. Running Wolf listened, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. She felt herself trapped in his gaze, mesmerized by the way the starlight carved shadows and highlights across his strong features. He was power held in check, a storm waiting to be unleashed. "My son tells me you risked your life for him," Running Wolf said finally, his deep voice filled with a kind of wonder. "He says you climbed down the rock like a warrior, with a courage that would shame many of my own men." A blush crept up Sarah's neck. Any decent person would have done the same. Would they? Running Wolf's question wasn't rhetorical, it was a challenge. "I have not met many of your people who would risk their own life for one of mine." The truth in his words was a bitter pill. She thought of Mrs. Henderson's hateful whispers, of Sheriff Morrison's wary eyes. She thought of the fear and suspicion that poisoned the air in Cedar Ridge. Would any of them have climbed down that cliff? Would even her own father? "I'm not like most of my people," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "No," he agreed, his eyes searching hers. "I can see that you are not." Little Eagle tugged on his father's buckskin shirt, speaking rapidly. Running Wolf nodded, then knelt to his son's level, their conversation becoming more private, more intimate. Sarah watched the fierce war chief's expression soften as he looked at his child. It was a glimpse behind the mask, a flicker of the father beneath the warrior. When Running Wolf stood again, his expression had changed. There was a new intensity in his eyes, something that looked almost vulnerable, though she sensed this was a man who rarely showed such a thing. "My son says you spoke our words to him," Running Wolf said. "He says you comforted him in the tongue of the people. Where did a white woman learn the Comanche language?" "Only a few words," Sarah admitted, "from traders. I've always been curious about different people, different ways of living." "Curious?" he repeated, tasting the word. Most of your people are curious only about how much land they can take from us. The accusation stung because it was true. The world is changing, she said softly, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. Maybe it's time we tried to understand each other instead of just fighting. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You speak strange words for the daughter of the white holy man. My father preaches love for all of God's children, she replied, lifting her chin. I just choose to listen to that part of his message. A ghost of a smile touched Running Wolf's lips, a sight so unexpected and devastatingly handsome that it made her breath catch. And what do you hear in his message, Sarah Whitmore? The way he said her full name sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't an accusation. It was an intimacy, a connection. I hear that courage and kindness matter more than the color of a person's skin. Little Eagle, who had been listening intently, said something to his father, his tone pleading. Running Wolf's expression grew thoughtful. He exchanged a few more words with his son, glancing at Sarah. She only caught fragments, words that sounded like brave heart and good spirit. Finally, Running Wolf turned back to her. My son wishes to give you a gift, a token of his gratitude. Little Eagle stepped forward. He reached into a small leather pouch at his waist and pulled out a silver pendant. It was in the shape of an eagle with its wings outstretched, crafted with breathtaking skill. Tiny turquoise stones were set as the bird's eyes. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a work of art, a sacred object. Little Eagle, she breathed, knowing this was a gesture of immense significance. The boy held it out to her, speaking softly in Comanche. Running Wolf translated, his voice gentle. He says the eagle sees all things from the sky and protects those with brave hearts. He wants you to wear it, so the spirits will know you are under his family's protection. Sarah knelt, her hands trembling as she accepted the pendant. Thank you, she said, then tried the Comanche phrase she knew. Ura Marua. The boy's face split into a brilliant, beaming smile. He reached out and touched a lock of her blonde hair with a look of pure wonder, his innocent curiosity a stark contrast to the suspicion she faced every day. When was the last time anyone had looked at her with such simple, unconditional acceptance? As she fastened the pendant around her neck, she felt Running Wolf's eyes on her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. When she stood, he had moved closer. So close she could smell the scent of leather, sage, and the clean night air on his skin. The debt between us is a great one, he said, his voice a low rumble. In my culture, the life of a child, especially the son of a chief, is a debt that can never be fully repaid. There is no debt, she insisted. But there is, he countered, his gaze unwavering. You are the woman who risked everything for the child of an enemy. Such an act creates a bond that cannot be broken. She was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about gratitude. She had unknowingly stepped into a complex world of honor, obligation, and cultural law that she didn't understand. She had tied her fate to his. What kind of bond? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. That remains to be seen, he said finally. But know this, Sarah Whitmore. You are no longer a stranger to the people. Your name will be spoken with honor around our council fires. One of the other warriors called out, his tone urgent. Running Wolf replied sharply, then turned back to Sarah, a flicker of regret in his eyes. We must go, he said, but this is not goodbye. Will I see you again? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she felt a hot blush of embarrassment. Running Wolf's slow smile returned, more potent this time. The eagle pendant you wear is not just a decoration. It is a symbol. It marks you. It means you are under my protection. He took another step closer. If you are ever in danger, if you ever have need of me, ride 2 miles north of your settlement. You will find a great oak tree by a stream called Willow Creek. Tie a piece of white cloth to its lowest branch. Someone will find you. Why? She asked, genuinely bewildered. Why would you do this for me? He reached out and his fingers brushed against the pendant where it rested against her collarbone. The brief contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. She saw something flicker in his eyes. He had felt it too. "Because in saving my son," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, "you may have saved more than just one small life. The tensions between our peoples are a storm waiting to break. An act of kindness like yours, it is more precious than gold. It is a seed of peace in a field of war." Little Eagle ran to her one last time, wrapping his small arms around her waist in a fierce, spontaneous hug. She hugged him back, fighting the sudden sting of tears. As the boy returned to his father, Running Wolf mounted his horse with fluid grace, pulling Little Eagle up in front of him. The boy waved enthusiastically as the warriors turned their horses and vanished into the darkness as silently as they had appeared. Sarah stood alone under the vast, star-dusted sky, her hand pressed to the silver eagle at her throat. The night air was cool, but the pendant felt warm against her skin, as if it held a life of its own. She should go back. She knew she should, but she couldn't move. In the space of a few hours, her world had been turned completely upside down. She was no longer just the preacher's cursed daughter. She was the woman who had saved the son of a Comanche war chief. A woman who had been looked at not with suspicion, but with respect, with honor, with something more. As she finally rode back toward the distant flickering lights of Cedar Ridge, a defiant decision took root in her heart. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would find an excuse to ride north. She would find that old oak tree by Willow Creek. Not because she needed help, but because she needed to know that the connection she felt, that impossible spark in the darkness, was real. She was carrying a secret now, a dangerous and beautiful secret. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed. 3 days of living a lie. The eagle pendant remained hidden beneath the high collar of her dress, a secret weight against her skin. Every whisper in town felt like an accusation. Every suspicious glance from her neighbors felt like a judgment. The secret burned inside her, a constant, hidden fire. That morning on her way to the general store, Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the air like a rusty knife. "Sarah May, just where did you disappear to the other evening? Your poor father was beside himself." Sarah forced a polite smile. "I went for a ride, Mrs. Henderson. The night air helps me sleep." The old woman's eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "Decent young ladies don't go gallivanting around in the dark. That wild streak of yours will bring nothing but trouble." Before Sarah could reply, a new voice interrupted them. "Miss Whitmore." A word. It was Sheriff Morrison. His face was a grim mask of concern. Sarah's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Of course, Sheriff." He led her a few steps away, his voice low and serious. "We had some trouble the other night. A Comanche raiding party was spotted near Devil's Ledge. You didn't happen to see anything unusual during your ride, did you?" The lie came so easily it scared her. "No, Sheriff, nothing at all. I stayed close to home." The sheriff's pale blue eyes bored into her, searching for any crack in her story. "These are dangerous times, Miss Whitmore. Tensions are at a boiling point. Any contact between our people and theirs could be the spark that starts a war. A war that would get a lot of good folks killed." She could feel the pendant, cold and heavy against her skin. A secret brand. "I understand." "Do you?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because some folks in this town think your sympathies lie in unhealthy directions. They're watching you, Sarah May. They're watching you real close." The warning was a blade of ice in her gut. She entered the general store, her hands trembling, hoping to escape the oppressive cloud of suspicion. But trouble, it seemed, was determined to find her. "Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah!" It was Tommy Fletcher. His young face lit up when he saw her. He ran over, his voice bright and innocent and dangerously loud. "Did you find him? The boy on the cliff?" The store went silent. Utterly, completely silent. Every person inside, Mr. Peterson examining a bolt of cloth, Mrs. Cranwell selecting preserves, froze. Every eye turned to her. Sarah felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her, sharp and hungry and hostile. The air crackled with tension. "What boy, Tommy?" she asked, her voice strained. knowing her future hinged on her next words. The Indian boy. Tommy's voice echoed in the sudden stillness. The one I told you about. You grabbed your rope and rode off faster than I've ever seen anyone move. Did you save him? The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier than stone. Sarah could hear the blood pounding in her ears. Then a jar of preserves slipped from Mrs. Cranwell's hand, shattering on the floorboards. The sound was like a gunshot. You helped a savage? Mrs. Cranwell's voice was a choked whisper, filled with a horrified disgust that was more terrifying than a scream. I knew it! Mr. Peterson slammed his fist on the counter, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. I knew that girl was trouble. She's got the devil in her, just like her mother. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Mrs. Cranwell spat, her face twisted with hate. Her mother consorted with dark forces. Now the daughter consorts with savages. Sarah stood tall, her voice shaking but clear. There was a child in danger. Any child. Wouldn't the Christian thing be to help? Christian? Mr. Peterson's laugh was a harsh, ugly bark. There ain't nothing Christian about helping the enemy. Those heathens would scalp every last one of us and not think twice. But he was just a boy, Tommy protested, his eyes filling with tears, frightened by the raw hatred of the adults around him. Just a little kid who was scared. Shut your mouth, boy, a new voice roared. A big barrel-chested man named Jedediah Thorne stepped forward. His face was a mask of cold fury. Thorne's family had been killed in a raid years ago, and his hatred for the Comanche was a living, breathing thing. You don't understand what she's done. This could mean war. The store erupted into chaos. Voices rose in an angry chorus. They called her a traitor, a spy. They demanded Sheriff Morrison arrest her. They shouted that she should be run out of town before she brought death and destruction down on them all. And then the bell above the door jingled. The angry voices sputtered and died. Reverend Jeremiah Whitmore stood in the doorway, his kind, gentle face taking in the scene. The shattered glass, the furious townspeople, and his daughter standing alone in the center of their hate. What seems to be the trouble here? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Your daughter, Thorne snarled, pointing a thick finger at Sarah. She's been giving aid to the enemy. She saved a Comanche brat out on Devil's Ledge. For all we know, she told them all our weaknesses. Reverend Whitmore's gaze met his daughter's. In his eyes, she saw not condemnation, but a flicker of sad understanding. He knew. He knew she had done it. I see, he said quietly. Sarah, let's go home. She ain't going nowhere. Thorne blocked the door. Not until Sheriff Morrison gets here. She needs to answer for what she's done. That's enough, Jedediah. The Reverend's voice suddenly held the steel authority of the pulpit. My daughter is not a traitor. If she helped a child in distress, then she acted according to the Christian principles I have tried to instill in all of you. Christian principles? Mrs. Cranwell shrieked. Those savages ain't human. They're godless heathens. They are human beings, her father replied, his voice ringing with conviction. Created by the same God who created us. And any child in danger deserves our compassion. But his words were like fuel on a fire. The crowd's anger only intensified. Sarah realized with a sickening lurch of her stomach that she hadn't just endangered herself. She had dragged her father into the fire with her. She had shattered his place in this community. Thorne stormed out of the store. I'm fetching the sheriff. This ends now. As her father led her through the hostile crowd, Sarah could feel their hatred like a physical force, pressing in on her from all sides. The silver eagle felt like it was burning a hole through her skin. The beautiful secret she had cherished was now a weapon being used to destroy her. By evening, a mob had gathered outside their small house. They carried torches that threw flickering, monstrous shadows against the walls. They shouted her name, calling her a witch, a traitor, a Judas. They threw rocks that shattered the windows, the sound of breaking glass echoing the shattering of her life. Her father stood by the door, pale but resolute, trying to reason with them, but his words were lost in the roar of their fury. Sarah watched from the shadows of her room, her heart breaking. She had brought this down on him. Her one act of kindness had unleashed a storm of hate that was about to consume them both. She clutched the eagle pendant in her hand. "If you are ever in danger," Running Wolf's words echoed in her mind. "Tie a piece of white cloth to its lowest branch." She looked at the angry faces in the torchlight, at Thorn, who was whipping them into a frenzy. She looked at her father, standing alone against their rage. She was in danger. They were both in danger. And she made a decision that would change everything. When the moon was high and the mob had finally dispersed, their anger simmering but not extinguished, Sarah slipped out the back of the house. She saddled Belle in the darkness, her movements swift and silent. She was going to Willow Creek. She was going to find that old oak tree. She was placing her faith and her life in the hands of the very man her people called the enemy. It was a desperate gamble, a foolish hope, but it was the only hope she had left. As she rode out into the darkness, away from the town that hated her, she didn't know if she was riding toward salvation or straight into a trap. The ride to Willow Creek was a journey through a landscape of fear. Every rustle in the brush, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt of panic through her. Was that the sound of Thorn and his men following her? Was every shadow a lurking threat? The moon played tricks on her eyes, turning gnarled trees into menacing figures. She pushed Belle harder, the cool night air stinging her face. After what felt like an eternity, she found it. A massive oak tree, its ancient branches spreading like skeletal arms against the starry sky, right beside a stream that glittered in the moonlight. Willow Creek. Her hands shook as she tore a strip of fabric from her petticoat. It was a flimsy piece of white cloth, a fragile symbol of her desperate hope. She tied it to the lowest branch, the knot feeling both flimsy and final. And then she waited. The silence was absolute. The minutes stretched into an hour. The hope that had fueled her ride began to curdle into a cold, sickening dread. He wasn't coming. It was a lie, a cruel trick. Or worse, the signal was a trap, meant to lure her out into the open. She was a fool, a naive, trusting fool. Just as she was about to give up, to untie the cloth and ride away to whatever fate awaited her, she heard a sound. Not a twig snapping. It was more like the air itself had shifted. She spun around, and he was there. But it wasn't Running Wolf. A Comanche warrior stepped out from the shadows of the trees. He was tall and lean, his face a hard mask of suspicion, his eyes cold and sharp as obsidian chips. He held a bow in one hand, an arrow already nocked and aimed directly at her heart. She recognized him from the group at Devil's Ledge. He was the one who had watched her with distrust. He spoke in rapid Comanche, his tone harsh and demanding. She couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I need to see Running Wolf," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He told me to come here. He gave me this." She pulled the eagle pendant out from under her dress, holding it up so it caught the moonlight. The warrior's eyes narrowed. He looked at the pendant, then back at her face. The arrow didn't waver. He barked another question at her. "My town. They know," she tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "They know I saved his son. They call me a traitor. They want to hurt me. My father." The warrior, whose name she would later learn was Black Moccasin, remained unmoved. To him, she was just a white woman, and white people only ever brought lies and betrayal. This could all be an elaborate ambush. Desperate, she switched tactics. She used one of the few Comanche phrases she knew, a phrase she'd heard Running Wolf say to Little Eagle. "Brave heart," she said, touching the pendant. "Running Wolf. Little Eagle. Brave heart." Something flickered in the warrior's cold eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. He lowered his bow, just an inch. He let out a low whistle, a signal into the darkness. More warriors materialized from the trees, surrounding her in a silent, intimidating circle. They were ghosts, appearing from nowhere. Black Moccasin spoke to them, his voice low and guttural. He was clearly arguing, gesturing from her to the pendant and back again. Finally, after a tense exchange, he gave a curt nod. He grabbed Belle's reins and began leading her deeper into the woods, the other warriors flanking them. They traveled for miles in unnerving silence, their horses making almost no sound on the forest floor. At last, they came to a hidden encampment, the soft glow of campfires visible through the trees. It was a bustling village, filled with the sounds of life, a world away from the silent hatred of Cedar Ridge. Black Moccasin led her to the largest teepee in the center of the camp. He spoke to the guard, and a moment later, the flap was pushed aside. Running Wolf emerged. He was not wearing war paint now. In the flickering firelight, his features were softer, but no less commanding. His eyes found her immediately, and his expression was a complex mixture of shock, concern, and something else she couldn't name. "Sarah Whitmore," he said, his voice a low rumble. The eagle called for help. "They know," she gasped, the story pouring out of her. The general store. Tommy Fletcher's innocent words. Thorne's fury. The mob outside her house. "They're calling me a traitor. They threw rocks at our house. They want to punish me. Jedediah Thorne is leading them. I think they might kill us." Running Wolf listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury as she spoke. The air around him seemed to grow colder, more dangerous. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, the muscles in his jaw working. "This Thorne," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "he uses my son's life as an excuse to spill blood." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a fire she had not seen before. "You risked your life for my child. This is how your people repay you? With stones and death threats?" The injustice of it all, the sheer, raw unfairness, hung in the air between them. But then, a new horrifying thought struck Sarah. "It's not just me," she whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "Sheriff Morrison, he said there was a raiding party near Devil's Ledge. Thorne is using that too. He's telling the town that I'm a spy, that I helped the raiders. He's gathering men. I think they're planning to attack." Running Wolf went perfectly still, his eyes narrowed. "A raiding party? Near Devil's Ledge?" He turned and spoke rapidly in Comanche to Black Moccasin, who shook his head firmly, replying with equal speed. Running Wolf turned back to her, and what he said next made her blood run cold. "There was no Comanche raiding party," he said, his voice grim. "My warriors were not near Devil's Ledge that night. We were searching for my son, far to the west." He paused, a terrible understanding dawning on his face. "But there was another party in the area, a Kiowa war band. They are our enemies as well as yours. They are known for their cruelty." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in Sarah's mind, forming a picture more horrific than she could have imagined. "Thorne, he's lying," she breathed. "He's using the Kiowa raid and blaming it on you. He's creating an excuse, a reason to start a war. A war he intends to profit from," Running Wolf finished, his voice laced with cold fury. "This man does not seek justice. He seeks chaos and power." He looked at her, and the weight of the world seemed to be in his eyes. "He has used your act of kindness to create a firestorm, and now that firestorm threatens to consume us all." The truth was laid bare between them. Jedediah Thorne was the real monster. He was manufacturing a war, manipulating two peoples toward mutual destruction, all for his own twisted purposes. And Sarah was trapped in the middle, the unwitting pawn in his deadly game. Running Wolf began to pace back and forth in front of the fire, a caged panther contemplating its next move. His warriors watched him, waiting for his command. He could call for war. He had every right to. The white settlers were poised to attack, spurred on by lies. His honor and the safety of his people demanded a response, a violent, bloody response. But then he stopped. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the girl who had climbed down a cliff for his son, the girl who now stood before him, her life in ruins because of it. "A fire started by a lie can only be extinguished by the truth," he said, his voice resolute. "War is what Thorne wants. We will not give it to him." He began issuing a series of rapid commands in Comanche. Warriors scattered, moving with silent, deadly purpose. A plan was forming, a desperate, dangerous gamble that would put all of their lives on the line. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of grim determination and a strange, fierce tenderness. "Thorne has built his power on a lie. We are going to tear it down with the truth." But to do that, I need you. Me? What can I do? You must go back, he said, and the words hit her like a physical blow. Back? They'll kill me. You will not be alone, he assured her, his gaze unwavering. My warriors will be shadows in the trees watching over you. You must return to Cedar Ridge. You must face them. You must trust me, Sarah Whitmore. Trust him? He was asking her to walk back into the lion's den, to face the mob that wanted her dead. He was asking her to believe that he, a man she barely knew, a man her people considered a savage, could save her. She looked into his eyes, into their dark, honest depths, and she saw not a savage, but a leader, a father, a man of honor, the same honor that had compelled him to offer his protection, the same honor that was now compelling him to prevent a war rather than start one. She took a deep breath. What do I have to do? The ride back to Cedar Ridge was the opposite of her ride away from it. She was no longer running from a vague threat. She was riding toward a specific, terrifying confrontation. But this time she wasn't alone. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them. Black Moccasin and a dozen other warriors moving like ghosts through the pre-dawn gloom, a silent, deadly escort. She arrived as the first rays of sun were painting the eastern sky. The town was already awake, buzzing with a nervous, angry energy. Men were gathering in the main street, armed with rifles and shotguns. At their head was Jedediah Thorne, his face flushed with righteous fury, his voice booming as he stirred the men into a killing frenzy. The savages have one of our own, he roared, pointing a finger at the parsonage. That preacher's daughter is a traitor. She's been helping them. They're probably planning to attack us at this very moment. We have to ride out and meet them. We have to hit them before they hit us. For our wives, for our children. Sarah slid off Belle's back, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Her father ran out of the house, his face pale with fear when he saw her. Sarah, where have you been? They're going to... It's all right, father, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Stay here. She walked forward alone into the center of the street, placing herself directly in the path of Thorne and his armed posse. The angry murmuring died down, replaced by a stunned, hateful silence. All eyes were on her. Well, 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 Thorne sneered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Look what the coyote dragged in. Come back to watch your town burn, have you? Or did your savage friends send you back to open the gates for them? You're a liar, Jedediah, Sarah said, her voice ringing out in the quiet street. It was shocking how loud it sounded. Thorne's face darkened with rage. What did you call me? You heard me, she said, taking a step forward. There was no Comanche raiding party. You know it. I know it. You're lying to these people. You're trying to start a war for your own selfish reasons. A wave of angry shouts erupted from the crowd. She's crazy. Don't listen to her. She's one of them. She's lost her mind, Thorne yelled, pointing at her. The savages have twisted her brain. Seize her. Two men from the posse started to move toward her. Sarah stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked past them, toward the trees at the edge of town. Trust me, Running Wolf had said. And then they appeared. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't an attack. Running Wolf and 20 of his warriors rode out from the trees, their horses moving at a slow, deliberate walk. They were not painted for war. They held no weapons in their hands. They stopped at the edge of town, a silent, powerful presence. The townsfolk gasped, their anger turning to fear. They raised their rifles, their knuckles white. See? Thorne screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of triumph and panic. I told you, it's an attack. She led them right to us. Fire! But before anyone could pull a trigger, Running Wolf raised his hand, a universal sign for peace. And he spoke, his powerful voice carrying across the distance. We are not here for war, he called out. We are here for the truth. And from behind him, two of his warriors brought forward a captive, a man with the distinctive markings of a Kiowa warrior. He was gagged, his eyes wide with terror. This man is not Comanche, Running Wolf declared. He is Kiowa. He and his brothers were the ones who raided near Devil's Ledge. They were captured on our lands this morning. Running Wolf paused, letting his words sink in. Then he locked his eyes on Jedediah Thorne. And he has told us a very interesting story, a story about a white man from this town, a man who has been secretly trading them rifles. Rifles in exchange for information. A man who promised them free rein to raid as long as the blame fell on the Comanche. A man who planned to use the chaos to seize land and power. A stunned silence fell over the street. The townsfolk looked from the Kiowa captive to Running Wolf, and then slowly to Jedediah Thorne. Thorne's face had gone a ghastly shade of white. The blood drained from his face, replaced by pure, cornered animal panic. Lies, all lies, it's a trick. They're savages, you can't believe a word they say. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his eyes narrowed, studying Thorne's panicked expression. Jedediah, the sheriff said, his voice cold as steel. You told me you saw the war paint yourself. You said you recognized the Comanche markings. I thought I did. In the dark, it's easy to be mistaken. Thorne stammered, his bluster completely gone. This Kiowa tells us, Running Wolf continued, his voice calm and relentless, that his secret trading partner has a very specific brand on his rifles, a small T carved into the wooden stock. Every eye in the crowd turned to the rifle in Thorne's hands. Slowly, as if in a trance, Sheriff Morrison walked over to Thorne. He didn't say a word. He simply took the rifle from Thorne's trembling grasp. He turned it over, and there, carved neatly into the stock, was a small, unmistakable letter, T. The gasp that went through the crowd was a single, unified sound of shock and betrayal. Thorne had been the traitor all along. He had been willing to sacrifice them all, to start a bloody war, just for his own greed. Thorne made a desperate move, lunging for the sheriff's pistol. But it was over. The men who, just minutes before, had been his loyal followers, now seized him, their faces masks of disgust and fury. They had been played for fools, and their rage was terrible to behold. Justice was swift. Sheriff Morrison arrested Thorne, locking him away. The angry posse dissolved, the men slinking back to their homes, their faces etched with shame. They looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time, and they didn't see a curse or a traitor. They saw the woman who had saved them from themselves. In the quiet aftermath, Sarah stood in the dusty street. Running Wolf rode toward her, stopping his horse just a few feet away. He looked down at her, and his eyes, once so fierce and guarded, were now filled with a deep, profound respect. The bond between us is strong, Sarah Whitmore, he said, his voice low and for her ears only. You have the heart of a warrior and the spirit of a peacemaker. You have repaid your debt 1,000 times over. There was never any debt, she whispered, looking up at him. A slow smile spread across his face, the same devastating smile that had stolen her breath on the cliff's edge. Perhaps not, he said. Perhaps it was something else entirely. He reached down and gently touched the eagle pendant that now lay openly against her dress. Wear this with pride, he said. It is a symbol not of debt, but of a bridge between two worlds, a bridge that you built with courage. With a final, meaningful look, he turned his horse and, with his warriors, rode back toward the plains, leaving behind a town that was forever changed. Sarah's father came and put his arm around her, his eyes filled with tears of pride and relief. The whispers that had followed her all her life were finally silenced, replaced by murmurs of awe and gratitude. She was no longer Sarah Whitmore, the preacher's cursed daughter. She was Sarah, the peacemaker, the woman with the heart of an eagle, and she knew as she watched Running Wolf disappear over the horizon that this was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning. What Sarah did took a courage most of us can only dream of. She faced down hatred, stood up to lies, and trusted her heart even when it led her into mortal danger. She proved that one person, with one act of kindness, can change the world. If her incredible story of bravery and justice moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and become part of our storytelling family. And we have to ask you this. When faced with a choice between what is easy and what is right, which path would you choose? Let us know in the comments below. We can't wait to hear from you.